Hello, everyone. Welcome to another special Talking Feds one-on-one, where today we're asking the question on many people's lips, including maybe most famously Stephen Colbert, which is, who is Mike Johnson, the two heartbeats away from the presidency and the new Speaker of the House? And to answer that question, we're really lucky to have the political journalist who's covered him as closely as anybody since his rapid ascent and before, Annie Karni. She's a congressional correspondent for the New York Times, previously covered the White House for them, previously, before being on the Times, covered the White House, the Hillary Clinton campaign for Politico, and before that, a real beat reporter at City Hall and local politics, the kinds that few towns have anymore, but New York does, fortunately. And she worked at the Post and Daily News. Thanks so much for joining us today, Annie Karni.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
All right. So quite the cipher. And you've probably been asked this question frequently. Mike Johnson kind of emerges comes out of nowhere to this very prominent position. Maybe I'll start here, but I think your sort of thoughts on him will be more illuminating than my trying even to guide you. But he identifies himself as an arch conservative. What does that mean? Even what in his own mind? Who is he in the American political spectrum?
That's a great starting place. Yes, he's from Louisiana. Was a little known congressman who never really ran a competitive race. He's from the Bible Belt. He's a deeply Christian evangelical conservative. He has told people, if you want to understand my worldview and my political view, pick up the Bible. That's my worldview. So deeply Christian. He distinguished himself before this, probably mostly for his role in trying to overturn the election results in 2020 on Trump's behalf. He was not as prominent as Jim Jordan in that fight, but he, was a silent, pivotal partner. He was the one who was recruiting House Republicans to sign a legal brief supporting a lawsuit to overturn those results. And it was, something that the Supreme Court ultimately rejected, had no real legal merit. But this is a guy who
he's a lawyer, right?
He's a lawyer. He's a constitutional lawyer by training. So that was he was an election denier first, and he was, a deeply conservative voting record on social issues. Opposed same-sex marriage, is in favor of a national abortion ban. And these are like things that he has talked a lot about. What's interesting about Mike Johnson is no one really paid any attention to him, but he, for decades, he had a podcast that he did with his wife. He was writing op-eds in the local paper in Louisiana, expressing really arch conservative social views that, someone described to me as, he is on gay marriage and homosexuals in general, kind of like where the Republican Party was in the 1990s and where the country was in the 1950s. I mean, he thinks that, homosexuality is a sin, and he's written that. So these are kind of
these different parts, and all, of course, all tied up in this package of a, dweeby accountant-looking guy with glasses, so he seems a little bit benign compared to others.
Taken lightly.
He's not a fire and brimstone. He's a guy, right?
It's under, yes, but that's key to the whole package. It's under this mild-mannered, very nice, he's kind of a handsome guy, but in a kind of understated way. He wears round glasses and a floppy brown hair, and he looks kind of like a nice guy, and he's mild-mannered. He's not like a Jim Jordan aggressive personality, but he has these very hardcore beliefs.
You've mentioned Jim Jordan now twice, and I've seen different quotes from his colleagues. It's basically I forget the sort of pithy way of putting it, but it's Jim Jordan without the, or Jim Jordan with the whatever. So that if you want to understand his substantive views or his bottom line views,
Right. That
Jim
being
Jordan's,
said, I
yeah,
mean, we can
right,
do this later after we can talk about like how he even got here and why we're
right,
talking about him at all. But now, like he has been, on the other hand, now I'm hearing people say like, we don't even know what he stands for. He's been part of the vote no, hope yes caucus in Congress for so long because he never
right.
really had to be a decision maker. And now, he's in the past he's voted against Ukraine aid. Now he's saying he's for Ukraine aid. Now, and some people have said, I don't know, you can say this is to his credit or not, depending on your view of him, but he has told members, like, I understand that I'm no longer representing a red district in Louisiana. I'm Speaker of the House. And so I'm kind of expanding what I understand my role to be in
And
terms of
he's
these.
already viewed with some suspicion, right, by the far right for having shepherded the one budget deal and
Yeah,
the like.
they're
He
already
might.
angry at him. Yeah.
Right. All right. Let's talk. I want to unpack the two things that you said, Annie, the 2020 deal and then some of this religious stuff. So if I'm not mistaken, in 2015, he opposed Trump in pretty strong terms. One always wonders, how does Trump enjoy the evangelical support he does when, I know we're all sinners, but he really sets a high bar for, and but so Johnson
Yeah.
trashed him, right? And then come 2020, so talk about his sort of early history
Yeah.
because he comes to
So
be a Trump staunch ally. Yeah.
yeah, me and my colleague Steve Eater uncovered these old Facebook posts. Again, this guy like was writing and talking everywhere. So there's a long paper trail. We found these old posts that came after the first Republican debate in 2015, when Trump famously had that exchange with Megyn Kelly, where she said, "You call women pigs and animals and dogs," and he responded, "Only Rosie O'Donnell," and it was like this kind of horrifying moment. And Mike Johnson went on Facebook and said, like, was just express he was appalled, and he said, I was watching the debate with my son. We need a president who's better than this. And then he said, like, this is a guy who could start a war just because someone, like, he didn't like someone, like, that he's too erratic. He doesn't have the temperament to be the commander in chief. This was at a time when, like, it's fun to find that. It's also the least shocking thing at all. I mean, all of Trump's biggest supporters have said things like that in the past. Lindsey Graham called him like a narcissist, and I mean, they all trashed him, and they all like ultimately fell in line. So Mike Johnson is another one who, you know, we know what his real feelings were when he thought this guy wasn't the future of the party, and then he was. And so now, our report on those posts, in reaction to that, he came out and endorsed Trump the next day. So
Yeah, he might have had a little woodshedding phone call, I guess. So he's
yeah,
not, I mean, you might think of him as this sort of incredibly principled in his own mind, religious guy, but there's obvious strain of political
yes.
finger pointing.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between Johnson's comments back then and everyone else's comments back then was that he holds himself to be this, moral
Right.
center, religious center, and he did the same flip that everyone did on Trump.
Right, but that's still his spiel, isn't it, about 2020? So maybe explain this. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but he wants to profess that unlike the Jim Jordans of the world who were lawless and crass and whatever it takes, he had a legal strategy and was actually a more constitutional, august kind of election stealer or something.
Yeah, I
Can
guess.
you explain how he views himself in the 2020 kind of constellation?
Well, I think by that time, he was just a hardcore Trump supporter because that's where the party was, and but yes, he went the legal route, where he tried to, he was like a key architect of the objections to certifying the election, and he went around collecting signatures on Trump's behalf, telling his colleagues that Trump was anxiously waiting for them to sign, and he claimed that the election was rigged. And since then, he has
The brief did say it was rigged. I thought it was some more technical legal argument. Okay, so he was all in as an election denier, in other words.
Yeah, full on election denier. And even since then, he's been in the face of all the Trump indictments, he's been just talking about how this is a political persecution of Trump. So just like total party line defensive at this point.
He was very obscure to the American public, certainly to me. What about to his colleagues? So was he, you have this sense of like last man standing in the musical chairs game
That's exactly what it was.
of the speakership. But do you have a sense of how the members on both sides of the aisle view him? And, as you've pointed out, there's this funny, almost built-in contrast between the benign, dweeby, physical guy and then the, on paper, extremely dogmatic, far right, almost right, doesn't believe in the separation of church and state and the like. What when it came time to who's around? All right, Mike, come on up. What was he more of a known quantity to his 500 some colleagues, or he's been there like 6-8 years? Who is he to them, and have they been surprised so far?
So Democrats don't really know him. Like those who serve on Judiciary Committee know him a little bit, but I talked to a member of leadership who said like the first time that person ever shook his hand was to say, "Congratulations, Mr. Speaker." So he's kind of unknown to them. Republicans, the reason he was able to get 217 votes to become speaker is because he's never held committee chairmanship or a position in top tier leadership. He's never had to, promise anyone anything or tell anyone no. That was the way he came. That was the only way. He came after people were exhausted. The process had dragged on for weeks. All of the other candidates who had been in leadership, who, had the experience to take this job, had fallen. And it was always going to be someone from the far right of the party. Like there are too many in a majority that's such a slim majority. The far right has outsized influence. So it turned out that like if you supported same-sex marriage, that was a deal breaker for some of the religious arch conservatives in the Republican conference. And there's, a handful of them, which is enough to deprive someone of the speakership. So it was always going to be someone like the more quote unquote moderate center people like Tom Emmer. They just didn't pass this, social issue litmus test from the far right. So it was always going to be someone from that wing of the party. And it was going to be someone who had no real record. So he's a little bit unknown to his own colleagues, and that's why it worked.
Do you get the sense that to the far right, he was this sort of naif who they assumed they could kind of control, or is that more Machiavellian than? I remember remember it was 2 weeks ago, but at this point there was a certain desperation in the Republican who were looking like real Keystone cops, and it was super embarrassing, so they really needed a warm body.
That's how it's been described to me. It was people were tired, exhausted at the end of a long process, and they needed someone to emerge. And that's under no other circumstances would Mike Johnsen have risen to be Speaker of the House. I don't think that they think they can control him, but I think they liked that, he was fiscal conservative and like he's someone who is from their wing of the party, and that was a plus. But they're already the right is incredibly angry with him for going and we can talk about a few things.
Yeah, in fact, I want to end there. Let me just zero in a little bit, because one gets the impression, especially in the post-Dobbs world, that some of the Republicans, even supposedly very conservative ones, feel like the party, the dog that caught the car, and they're trying to temporize a little bit on social issues. This guy, at least from his record, really seems like his real heart and soul are culture warrior issues, very arch conservative at them, might very much paint the party with his prominence with that brush. Is there some worry about, wow, well, actually, let me ask another question. He is way to the right on social issues, yes? And how would you describe or bring that home?
I would say that Democrats think there's an opportunity, especially, there's 18 Republicans who represent districts Biden won in 2020, who, I mean, this is a great way to go to win back those seats. That this is
Billboards with the greatest quotes of Mike Johnson, like
right. I mean, they think there's an
LGBTQ
opportunity
people
here.
should, yeah.
And we've seen in multiple elections now that abortion is a huge winning issue for Democrats, and that's not something where he's going to change. I mean, I guess that the best he could I don't think he's going to bring abortion legislation to the House floor, but he has other things he has to do right now, so maybe he could.
But if he has a personal ambition that got him into politics,
Yes.
it's this kind of stuff, right?
It's this kind of stuff. It's absolutely. So yeah, I think that Democrats see an opportunity there to run against Mike Johnson and a guy who wants a national abortion ban. That's who's leading Republicans in Congress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just talk about the evidence to date is he's never held anything close to the sort of national stage he's now on, and he really did come out of relative nowhere for a Speaker of the House when you look at the names in history. So there's scant evidence to go on, but you've already averted any to the ire of the far right, and it looks like he's a guy who might want to, play ball in a way that Republicans have been very dogmatic about not doing. How are things? It's been a little bit like the drummer from Spinal Tap, right? Being the Speaker of the House. How are things shaping up for him in terms of playing ball in the long term, or what looked like that if you were his political consultant, what would you be telling him?
Well, let's look at a few of the moves, the early moves. So first of all, he did something McCarthy never did, which is endorse Trump out of the gate. So this is clearly a speaker who is Mr. Trump's guy. That's what he wants to be. So how will that play in if Trump loses the election in 2024 and Mike Johnson is Speaker of the House? What levers of power will he use to fight for Trump? We don't. To be.
Oh, you expect he's Trump live or die all the way,
Yes.
even if he.
Yes,
Wow,
he's Trump live or die all the way. I think he's made that clear. He went to Mar-a-Lago, already to kiss the ring, so to speak.
Okay.
So that's one. Another one, the first piece of legislation he brings to the floor is Israel aid. So and he does it in a way that confounded even a lot of Republicans, because what he did was he tied Israel aid to cuts to the IRS. And that is something that even conservatives think Israel aid, just pass Israel aid. And he did it in this deeply partisan way that was aimed at appeasing his far right flank, showing them, look, I'm the hard right guy. I'm doing this. We're going to pay for it with cuts to the IRS, which is like a deeply partisan Republican thing that doesn't actually save money.
In the wings of the deep state, that kind of thing.
Right. And it made it like this is it will not pass in the Senate. It will not get signed. So he, out of the gate, an issue that kind of seems like a not controversial issue of sending aid to Israel, he makes it deeply partisan. So that was, that I've heard criticism of that move already. So he does that to appease his far right flank. And what does he get for it in return? Absolutely nothing, because the next thing he has to do is pass a stopgap measure to avoid a government shutdown. And the right, just retaliates against him. They vote against it. And then they, in retaliation, just like they did to Kevin McCarthy, they, take down a rule to to kill a spending bill that was supposed to come to the floor. So they do the exact same thing they did to McCarthy to him. And they have even said, like, unlike McCarthy, who they hated personally, they say, like, we love Mike, but like, we're not gonna, that's strike one. And they're like, we're gonna play the same hardball tactics against him. So this was pointed out to me as like an example, a little bit of his inexperience, that he does this Israel partisan pay for it, gets nothing for it, kind of gets screwed by the hard right anyway.
And what about Ukraine? Could you just speak to that briefly?
So Ukraine, in the past, he has voted against funding for Ukraine. Now he's saying that he is for funding for Ukraine, but he wants, to tie it to getting something for the border, which is what a lot of Republicans want. And we'll see if there's any compromise there that Democrats would agree to. But he has told members, I want to do something for Ukraine, but I have to hold it as to have some leverage to get something on the border for that. So that's where he is on Ukraine funding. But right now he has, he left for the Thanksgiving break with having passed the same continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown that McCarthy passed that cost him his job. And now we'll see what happens that'll run out beginning of next year. And he's in a really difficult, same dynamics at play that McCarthy had.
Showdown with the far right. Yeah.
Same showdown with the far right. He has the same dynamic on his hands. And the only difference is, like, no one I talk to thinks that they will oust him. That's just like, they touched the hot stove once. Like, everyone saw how disastrous that would be. No one wants to do that again. So he has a little more job security, but he has the same dynamics that make the House like pretty ungovernable.
Yeah. Very good. So thank you so much. It does seem like the who he is, at least politically, is being revealed kind of week by week. Mm-hmm. And when there's more to talk about, we know where to come if you're available. So Annie, thanks so much for being with us to talk about he's third in line for the presidency. Second. Well, yeah, third person, right. And we'll look to you to learn more as he reveals more. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.